Paris, February 1680. A woman stands barefoot on the cobblestones of Place de Grève, flames licking the wood beneath her. Her name is Catherine de Chaise, but history will remember her as La Voisin, the witch who seduced nobility, conjured demons, and peddled death from behind velvet curtains. As the fire rises, nobles shiver not from the cold, but from the secrets they share with the condemned. She wasn't just a fortune teller. She built an empire of poison and sorcery under the Sun King's nose. But how did a poor Parisian girl climb to such terrifying heights? To understand the woman who nearly toppled the throne of France, we must step into the shadows of Versailles, where power slept beside fear and black masses whispered in candlelit silence. In the bitter chill of a Paris morning on February 22nd, 1680, the silence over Place de Grève was unnatural. The crowd gathered not for festivity nor rebellion, but to watch a woman burn. Her name was Catherine de Chaise, yet she stood there not as a mere citizen, but as the infamous La Voisin, a name whispered in the corridors of Versailles with dread. She did not weep. Her eyes, framed by age and smoke, glared defiantly at the mob that had once begged her for salvation, love, and vengeance. The wood cracked beneath her feet as flames began to rise, dancing toward the hem of her gown like hungry fingers. Some said she cursed her accusers with her final breath. Others claimed she smiled as the fire devoured her. Either way, the truth of her power died with her, along with the secrets of a court drowned in poison and superstition. Long before her name became a symbol of fear, Catherine de Chaise had been invisible to history. Born around 1640, likely in the dense heart of Paris, she was the daughter of no one important, raised with no particular privileges. Yet even as a child, she demonstrated a cunning far beyond her years. The market streets taught her more than scripture or letters ever could. How to read faces, how to listen without being noticed, and most importantly, how to sell a dream. She became skilled at palmistry and reading cards, mimicking the fortune tellers she watched at street corners, adding her own flair for the dramatic. This was not mere trickery, it was performance, persuasion, and power. And power, she would learn, was the rarest and most dangerous currency in all of France. At 20, she married Antoine Voisin, a jeweler and merchant of silk who seemed respectable enough. But business was not his strength. His shop failed, debts mounted. Catherine watched her fragile comfort dissolve into desperation. Yet she refused to fall. Her husband may have sunk beneath his failures, but she would not. With cold precision, she returned to her roots: cards, charms, whispered omens. At first, she offered readings to the poor and curious, charging little but learning much. And slowly, her name began to pass from mouth to mouth, especially among the lonely, the jilted, and the desperate. She did not simply predict love, she promised it. She did not simply read misfortune, she offered the chance to rewrite it. But it was not the poor who would raise her to prominence. It was the nobles. By the mid-17th century, France was gripped by a fever for the occult. Among the aristocracy, seances, astrology, and love magic became fashionable diversions. The salons of Paris buzzed with talk of fate and elixirs, of hidden knowledge and alchemical transformations. Catherine, now calling herself La Voisin, stepped into this world not as an outsider, but as a queen of shadows. She understood what the nobles wanted: certainty in a world ruled by whim and ambition. And she knew what to sell them: illusions dressed as solutions. Her home became more than a fortune-telling parlor. It was a sanctuary for secrets. Through her growing network of midwives, alchemists, and rogue priests, she offered more than readings. Abortions, love potions, charms to ensure a husband's fidelity, powders to speed an inheritance. Everything had a price, and all were available under her roof. Clients came in cloaks, with coins and shame. They left lighter, hopeful, and bound to her by silence. She had built an empire, and from that empire, she began to influence the highest reaches of the realm. Her most fateful client arrived in 1667, Françoise Athénase de Montespan, the king's most ambitious mistress, entered La Voisin's chambers under the cloak of desperation. She did not merely wish for affection. She wanted possession. She needed Louis XIV to love her not as a dalliance, but as an obsession. For that, she was willing to risk the darkest rites. A black mass was arranged in secrecy at a house on Rue de la Tannerie. Montespan arrived in silence. The priest, defrocked and corrupted, prepared the altar. And it was her naked body that served as the altar for sacrifice. Candles flickered, prayers twisted into invocations. A draught was prepared, a potion of lust, fear, and herbs whispered to corrupt the mind. After that night, Montespan's grip on the king deepened. Whether it was the potion or her renewed confidence, she reigned over the court for more than a decade. And every time doubt crept in, she returned to La Voisin. The rituals became more obscene. In some, Montespan would offer herself again, her body painted with sigils as incantations called upon infernal powers. Etienne Giborg, the rogue priest, invoked spirits over her flesh while sacrifices were made. Sometimes animals, sometimes it was whispered more. The black masses served not only to hold the king's love, but to ruin rivals. Names were chanted, demons were called, and La Voisin grew ever more untouchable. But when love wanes, desperation grows dangerous. In 1679, King Louis XIV began favoring another, the young and radiant Angelique de Fontanges. Montespan panicked. Love potions were no longer enough. She demanded death for Fontanges, and perhaps even for the king himself. At first, La Voisin balked. Regicide crossed a line, but the fortune was tempting and the mistress persuasive. A plan formed, slowly, involving her fellow poisoners, Catherine Trianon and the mysterious Romani. The method was elegant, a subtle poison, administered during a feast or via perfumed gloves. One drop would be enough to alter the fate of France forever. In her home, La Voisin began crafting the poison. Her laboratory was an apothecary's nightmare. Bottles of tinctures, powders ground from rare minerals and lethal herbs. The inheritance powders, as they were known, became her signature. She sold them with coded language and solemn instructions. Added to wine, watch and wait. Wives poisoned husbands. Nobles murdered competitors. And through it all, La Voisin thrived. Her power no longer came only from prophecy. It came from the certainty she offered to those who felt helpless in the rigid world of rank and court politics. And yet, beneath the glamour and perfumes, horror pulsed. Whispers circulated of infants stolen or sold, of sacrifices too grotesque to name. Witnesses would later claim that babies were burned in her ovens after rituals, their ashes buried in her garden. Some accounts may be exaggerated, mythologized by fear and gossip. But not all could be dismissed. Bones were found, ovens examined. The line between magician and murderer grew ever thinner. The beginning of La Voisin's fall came not from a spell gone wrong or a betrayed client, but from the death of a man who had kept too many secrets. In 1672, Captain Gaudin de Saint Croix, alchemist, nobleman, and lover to the infamous Marquise de Brinvilliers, died suddenly. His passing was unremarkable, but what authorities found in his belongings would shake the foundations of the kingdom. Hidden among his effects were glass vials of poison and letters implicating the Marquise in a conspiracy to murder her father and two brothers. The case was grotesque, sensational, and dangerous. In 1675, Marquise de Brinvilliers was captured, tried, and publicly executed, accused of patricide and fratricide. Her trial revealed a horrifying truth. Poison was not merely a tool of the gutter. It had climbed the staircase to the salons of the nobility. The Brinvilliers affair stirred a paranoia that clutched the royal court with icy fingers. If a noblewoman could so easily eliminate her kin, who else might be plotting in secret? Who among the courtiers smiled by day and brewed death by night? King Louis XIV, once indulgent of courtly decadence, now became suspicious and deeply fearful. Every meal posed a potential threat. Royal tasters were appointed, dishes sampled by trembling servants before they reached the king's table. Shadows stretched longer in Versailles. whispers sharpened like blades. Then came the arrest of Marie Bosse in 1679, a lesser-known fortune teller and poisoner, caught during a separate investigation. During her interrogation, Bosse uttered a name that rang through the halls of the Paris police like thunder: Voisin. She was not a simple accomplice. She was the spider at the center of the web. Her name sent panic through the noble ranks. Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, Lieutenant General of Police and loyal to the king, received a direct and dangerous order: root out the poisoners, no matter how high their clients stood. So was born the Chamber Ardente, a shadow court with the power to try cases of poisoning, witchcraft, and conspiracy. Its hearings would be secret, its judgments final. By March 1679, Voisin was arrested under the cover of night, taken from her home, where police uncovered alarming evidence: vials of mysterious substances, letters from clients, and coded documents. She was held without public announcement. The court moved in silence. The interrogations began. Under pressure, but never torture, Voisin spoke. What she revealed was staggering. Her list of clients read like a who's who of Parisian nobility: countesses, dukes, ladies of the bedchamber, even priests. But one name stood out among all others: Madame de Montespan. The king was horrified, not because he doubted the accusations, he had long harbored suspicions, but because to acknowledge them publicly would mean scandal of catastrophic proportions. His favorite mistress, mother of his children, tied to black masses and assassination plots? The damage to his prestige, to the sanctity of his court, would be irreparable. So he did what kings often do when cornered. He buried the truth. The public trial of Voisin proceeded, but carefully choreographed. Questions that threatened to implicate Montespan were avoided. Evidence was managed. Witnesses silenced. In February 1680, Voisin stood before the judges of the Chamber Ardente. The charges were many: poisoning, black magic, abortion, and infanticide. Her reputation was already poisoned in the public eye. Her fate preordained. What mattered now was control, ensuring the fire consumed her but spared the throne. She was sentenced to death by burning. The official order included torture, meant to extract a final confession. But authorities feared what she might say. Too many names, too many secrets. So they ignored the order. On the day of her execution, Catherine de Chaise walked with a dignity that unnerved the watching crowd. As the flames climbed her body, she refused to beg. Instead, she spat curses, whether at her accusers or at the men and women who had once begged her for potions and protection. History does not record. The fire claimed her quickly, her voice extinguished in the roar of judgment. Yet her death was no conclusion. It was only the beginning of the storm. Though the king had halted the public trials, he did not stop the hunt. Secret investigations continued for more than 2 years. Dozens of suspects were arrested, interrogated, and imprisoned without trial, held indefinitely by lettre de cachet, royal orders that required no justification. 36 were executed. Hundreds more vanished into the oubliettes of the Bastille, never to be seen again. The court, once a playground of whispers and pleasure, became subdued. Nobles watched their words. The salons dimmed. Louis XIV, once surrounded by mistresses and merriment, withdrew into a private sorrow. Madame de Montespan, though never formally charged, was quietly removed from court. She was given no public reprimand, no exile, but her presence was no longer welcome. She retired to a convent, where she lived out her days in prayer and charity, forever marked by the stain of her ambition. Versailles itself changed. The licentious splendor of the Sun King's earlier years gave way to a more austere, controlled atmosphere. The king grew more devout, eventually marrying Madame de Maintenon in secret, a pious woman who had no interest in black masses or occult rituals. Beyond the gilded gates of Versailles, the consequences rippled. The affair of the poisons revealed the rot beneath the veneer of nobility. It exposed how readily superstition could infect judgment, how quickly desperation could turn the powerful into supplicants at the altar of darkness. The legal system was overhauled. Pharmacies were ordered to keep meticulous records of substances sold. The sale of toxic substances was strictly regulated. Punishments for trafficking in poisons grew more severe. But the hunger for power, the fear of losing favor, the yearning to control love and death did not vanish. In 1720, a woman named Marie de la Ville was arrested, accused of attempting to recreate La Voisin's network. She was never tried. The memories were too fresh, the scars too deep. She was imprisoned indefinitely by lettre de cachet, locked away where her voice could cause no more harm. In the centuries that followed, La Voisin became legend. Her story was retold in pamphlets, plays, novels, and later, film. She was painted as a monster, a sorceress, a seductress. Yet behind every tale lies a truth both darker and more ordinary. A woman born into nothing, who climbed into the bedchambers of queens and courted kings not with beauty or bloodline, but with fear and knowledge. In a world where women had little power, she had forged her own path, however terrible it may have been. The affair of the poisons remains one of the most sinister episodes in French history, a collision of superstition, desperation, and ambition. It showed that even at the peak of civilization, belief in darkness can overwhelm reason, and that sometimes the fire at the stake does not end a chapter, it merely lights the way to the next.